What is the most unusual Bible verse? Turns out, it's just a prank. Bro was frowned upon even in the days of the Bible. Like a maniac shooting flaming arrows of death is one who deceives their neighbor and says, "I was only joking." Proverbs chapter 26 verses 18 to 19. New International Version. She lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys and whose emission was like that of horses. Ezekiel chapter 23 verse 20 Niv. Many verses, but I love them. Leviticus chapter 15, 19 When a woman has her regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean till evening. 20 Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. 21 Whoever touches her bed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. 22 Whoever touches anything she sits on must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. 23 Whether it is the bed or anything she was sitting on, when anyone touches it, he will be unclean till evening. 24 If a man lies with her and her monthly flow touches him, he will be unclean for 7 days. Any bed he lies on will be unclean, and on until. 29 On the 8th day she must take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting. 30 The priest is to sacrifice one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. In this way he will make atonement for her before the Lord for the uncleanness of her discharge. So pretty much girls icky. Proverbs chapter 25 verse 16 If you find honey, eat just enough, too much of it, and you will vomit. Like sure, it's practical advice. But one Sunday it was the verse of the day for our Sunday school lesson. Given all the verses available in the Bible, it seemed like a strange choice. If 2 men are fighting and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband from his assailant, and she reaches out and seizes him by his private parts, 12 You shall cut off her hand. Show her no pity. Dut. 25 to 11-12. Are oddly specific. Then I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being done under the sun, and behold I saw the tears of the oppressed and that they had no one to comfort them, and on the side of their oppressors was power, but they had no one to comfort them. So I congratulated the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still living, but better off than both of them is the one who has never existed, who has never seen the evil activity that is done under the sun. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 verses 1 to 3. Mark chapter 14 verses 46 to 50. They laid hands on Jesus and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, "Have you come out as against a robber, with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." And a young man followed him, with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him. But he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. The king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines. If a man beats his male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies as a direct result, he must be punished. But he is not to be punished if the slave gets up after a day or 2, since the slave is his property. Exodus chapter 21 verses 20 to 21. Song of Songs 7 to 8. 7 Your stature is like that of the palm, and your breasts like clusters of fruit. 8 I said, I will climb the palm tree. I will take hold of its fruit. May your breasts be like clusters of grapes on the vine, the fragrance of your breath like apples. Then the Lord opened the donkey mouth, and it said to Balaam, What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times? This one is weird even with context. He said it in Eddie Murphy's voice. My fave is the very end of Jonah. Jonah is in the desert but found a tiny tree with a gourd to give him shade. After a bit, the gourd shriveled and dies, and Jonah must suffer in the sun again. Jonah cusses out the gourd. Right then God came down to Jonah and chastised him. Good, Jonah. That gourd existed by no labor of your own. Quote. My personal favorite is Song of Solomon chapter 5 verse 4. Web translation is My beloved thrust his hand in through the latch opening. My heart pounded for him. Which already sounds kinky AF. But I particularly like how the KJV describes this butterflies in the stomach feeling. My beloved put his hand by the hole of the door, and my bowels were moved for him. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, I have a message from God for you. As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh and plunged it into the king's belly. 22 Even the handle sank in after the blade, and his bowels discharged. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Judges chapter 3 verse 20. I dunno if it's the most unusual, but I always liked the fact that Numbers chapter 12 verse 3 written by Moses says now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. Judges chapter 15 verse 16 And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. 13 This is what the Lord said to me. Go and buy yourself a linen undergarment and put it on, but do not put it in water. 2 So I bought underwear as the Lord instructed me and put it on. 3 Then the word of the Lord came to me a second time. 4 Take the underwear that you bought and are wearing, and go at once to the Euphrates Sea, and hide it in a rocky crevice. 5 So I went and hid it by the Euphrates, as the Lord commanded me. 6 A long time later the Lord said to me, Go at once to the Euphrates and get the underwear that I commanded you to hide there. 7 So I went to the Euphrates and dug up the underwear and got it from the place where I had hidden it, but it was ruined, of no use at all. 8 Then the word of the Lord came to me. 9 This is what the Lord says. Just like this I will ruin the great pride of both Judah and Jerusalem. Song of Songs 4-5. Your breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle that browse among the lilies. He said to Jacob, Let me eat some of that red stuff, because I'm exhausted. Genesis chapter 25 verse 30 Something about the way this is worded makes it seem strange. Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 26 You engaged in prostitution with the Egyptians, your neighbors with large genitals, and aroused my anger with your increasing promiscuity. The story this verse is a part of fits well with the whole biblical narrative. But why that extra detail about the Egyptians? Because they have long schlongs bro. I have always been partial to Jeremiah chapter 10 verse 5. Like a scarecrow in a cucumber field, their idols cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot walk. Do not fear them. They can do no harm nor can they do any good. I love the comparison to scarecrows in a field, but specifically a cucumber field. How random. Judges chapter 4 Barak routs Sisera's army and sends him fleeing for his life to the tent of Eber, trusting in an alliance they had. Yael, Eber's wife invites Sisera in and encourages him to lie down and rest. But Yael, Eber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep. Exhausted, she drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Judges chapter 4 verse 21, one of the most metal verses in the Bible. He that blesseth his friend with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, it shall be counted a curse to him. Proverbs chapter 27 verse 14. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 verse 19, a feast is made for laughter, wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. In the Niv translation, it says but money is the answer to everything, implying that while food and drink are fun, you gotta get out and work for that dollar bill. No one whose testicles are crushed or whose male organ is cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Deuteronomy chapter 23 verse 1. He turned around, looked at them and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. Don't forget the reason. It's because the boys made fun of him for being bald. It's because the mob of young men numbering in the hundreds had left their jobs and walked miles out of town to threaten to kill him and mock him for mourning the death of his mentor. That's what bald means in the context. There's no evidence Elisha was bald, after having seen him perform miracles. Thus they were defying God openly and God vindicated his prophet. The fact that 2 bears mauled 42 people strongly implies they didn't run but were so bloodthirsty that they tried to fight the bears. Genesis chapter 27 verse 11 is my favorite. My brother Esau is a hairy man, but I am a smooth man. Not a verse, but an excerpt from 1 Kings chapter 3 verses 16 to 28. Solomon makes a difficult decision. They argued back and forth in front of Solomon, until finally he said, "Both of you say this live baby is yours. Someone bring me a sword." A sword was brought, and Solomon ordered, "Cut the baby in half. That way each of you can have part of him." "Please don't kill my son," the baby's mother screamed. "Your Majesty, I love him very much, but give him to her. Just don't kill him." The other woman shouted, "Go ahead and cut him in half. Then neither of us will have the baby." Solomon said, "Don't kill the baby. Then he pointed to the first woman. She is his real mother. Give the baby to her. Everyone in Israel was amazed when they heard how Solomon had made his decision. They realized that God had given him wisdom to judge fairly. Here's John Mulaney's dissection of that. According to Kabbalah, these were two prostitutes, and there was obviously no clue as to who was the father. That in itself is a pretty bad thing, as the child would be restricted in many ways later on in life because of it. Now, if there were to be a question on who the mother was as well, the child would fall out of the category of mamzer bastard and become a Sufi foundling, which was an even lower level, with worse problems. Solomon wanted to scare these women into thinking that he would kill the baby as a punishment for bringing such a problem into this world. However, if the child were to have a mother, Solomon would spare the child and then his wrath onto the mother, possibly killing her for being a prostitute. So therefore the mother saying to give the child to the other woman, as a blatantly obvious statement of her motherhood, was a sacrifice of monumental importance, because for her saying that the child had a definite mother, she could have been killed. This is in response to the Jewish scholars' question of why the non-mother wanted the child to be killed, with no maternal instincts.